I'm Lekden, and this is a very brief introduction to debate in Tibetan Buddhism. The Tibetan tradition uses a style of debate that comes from Nalanda Monastery in ancient India. The style of debate was developed as the Buddhist philosophers and Hindu philosophers debated amongst each other, and it allowed them to really develop nuanced understandings of their respective philosophical systems. Instead of talking about the interesting history of debate, though, or the reason it is such a useful pedagogical tool, I'm just going to focus on what is happening in a debate. So if you were to see one, you would be able to understand why the two participants are using the type of language they're using and what each of them is hoping to prove. In a debate, there are always going to be two roles being played. The first role is the role of the person on defense, and their job is to accept a truth statement and then defend it, to make sure that they do not contradict any of the statements that they have already accepted, and then to make sure they do not accept any statement that is faulty. The other role is the role of the person on offense, and their job is to make their opponent contradict themselves, or to make their opponent accept a faulty truth statement. And once they do that, then they use scripture and logic to prove that accepting a faulty statement or accepting contradictory statements has absurd consequences. So what do I mean by truth statement or thesis? Well, there can be narrow truth statements or there can be wide ones. So an example of a narrow truth statement would be, the color of this robe is red. So that is a very narrow statement. It only focuses on a limited number of phenomena, or in this case, a single phenomenon, the color of this robe. But if I were to take that same truth statement and make it broader, I would use an if-then clause and say, if something is the color of a robe, then it follows that it is necessarily red. So now I've taken the same two parameters, the color of a robe and the color red, but I've expanded it to a much wider truth statement. And in this case, it is a faulty truth statement. We can posit the color of robes that is not red, and therefore it should not be accepted. But if it was accepted, as the person debating, I couldn't just prove it any way I wanted. There's a form I have to follow. So any of the statements I make has to be in one of two styles. I can either give a consequence, or I can give a reason. These are the only two ways that I can frame my language as the person on offense. And then the person responding on defense also only has two ways they can respond to either of those types of statements. So as an example, if someone accepted that truth statement, that if something is the color of a robe, it is necessarily red, then I would follow up with the consequence. It follows that, and I use that language to indicate that I'm saying a consequence. It follows that the color of a yellow robe is red. So I've just given an absurd consequence of the original truth statement. And now that I've given a consequence, the person on defense has two ways to respond. They can either accept my consequence and say, yes, I accept, or they can say, why? What is your reason? So these are the only two ways they can respond when they are presented a consequence. So in this case, we'll assume that the person on defense says, what is your reason? And so now I will give a reason, and I will say, it follows that the color of a yellow robe is red because, and I use the word because to indicate that I'm giving a reason. It follows because the color of a yellow robe is the color of a robe. And now I've given my reason, and the person responding only has, again, two ways they can respond. They can either say, my reason that isn't established. You have not proven your reason. You have not proven, in this case, that the color of a yellow robe is the color of a robe. The other option they can say is that there is no pervasion. And what that means is that it does not matter if you've proven or not proven your reasoning, because your reasoning bears no consequence on the earlier statement. So if the color of a yellow robe is or is not the color of a robe, it doesn't matter, because if something is the color of a robe, it does not have to be red. So that is what they would mean if they say there is no pervasion to your rationale, to your reasoning. Of course, in this instance, if they say there is no pervasion, then they have contradicted their original statement. And that was the whole point of the debate, and that is the reason I used that consequence to show their original statement has a flaw. And they have just contradicted it by accepting that there is other colors of robes that are not red. So that's all we're doing. We're using reasoning and we're using consequences to show whether a statement is true or not. And that is debate in a nutshell. That is the briefest introduction I can give you. I hope you watch a lot of debates and have fun. Thanks.
Yay! The subject, and just the way Madhusha debated, follows that it is not. Oh, Gelon, oh, bhikshus and scholars, just as a goldsmith would test gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it. In the same way, a person should take up my teachings, not merely out of respect for me. It follows that it is not, because there is not a source for this quotation.
What's the reason?
It follows that there is a source for this quotation.
I accept.
Because of the source.
The Kalama Sutra.
The Kalama Sutra. Yes. So in the context of this quotation, we say that a person who wants to practice the Buddha's teachings should first test the Buddha's teachings in the similar way to a goldsmith who burns, cuts, and rubs gold. In that context, we say that burning the gold is like similar to testing whether the teachings contradict valid cognition, direct valid cognition.
Direct valid cognition.
And if the cutting the gold is similar to testing whether they contradict inferential through power of reason.
Power of reason.
And in terms of the rubbing gold, it's similar to testing whether they are internally contradiction.
With other
scriptures. But it follows that it is not, because we say there are two kinds of people. Those who enter into the Buddha's teachings through faith, and those who enter into the Buddha's teachings by following the Dharma.
And so there are people who enter the Buddha's teachings through faith or through reasoning, and those who, even as they practice the Buddha's teachings, they do more so through the power of faith or through the power of reasoning.
Yeah. But it follows that in terms of these people who follow by the power of reasoning, follow as the Dharma, it follows that they generally will not enter the Buddha's teachings until they have established the Buddha's teachings through valid cognition.
Yes.
Yes.
I accept.
You accept. So therefore, it follows that in terms of the person, we call them a person of sharp faculties. A person of sharp faculties will not accept a proposition until he has established that proposition through valid cognition.
I accept.
And it follows that such a person will not develop the wish to achieve a particular goal until he's established the existence of that goal through valid cognition.
I accept, but there are different levels of wishing to achieve a goal.
Right. Well, in this context, we'd say, would such a person, this person of sharp faculties, would they go for refuge to the 3 jewels of refuge without establishing 3 jewels of refuge as a valid refuge?
Well, you posited I don't accept.
You don't accept.
Right.
So that's what
basically, no.
Such a person would not go to refuge without establishing the 3 jewels as a valid refuge.
I accept.
So it follows that such a person, in order to go for refuge to the Buddha jewel, has to establish the existence of the Buddha jewel.
Let's see. I accept.
So it follows that such a person, in order to go for refuge to the Buddha jewel, must realize emptiness.
I accept.
So it follows that such a person realizes emptiness without going for refuge to the Buddha jewel.
I accept.
It follows that there is a non-Buddhist to realize emptiness.
I accept.
The person who will not accept something unless he establishes it through valid cognition. Is it possible for such a person to go for refuge without realizing emptiness?
Is it possible? Yes, it's possible.
It's possible.
There's someone who do it.
So it's possible that some person can establish through valid cognition the 3 jewels of refuge without realizing emptiness.
That's not possible.
That's not possible. It's possible because you said that there is a person who will not go for refuge without establishing the 3 jewels, who goes for refuge to the 3 jewels without realizing emptiness.
No pervasion.
Positive pervasion.
The pervasion is that just because something they don't fully accept something without having realized what it is, hasn't necessarily realized
emptiness before going for refuge to the 3 jewels. So they go refuge to the 3 jewels, and they establish the 3 jewels of valid cognition, but they have not realized emptiness.
No, they go for refuge to the 3 jewels, but they don't fully establish that.
They don't fully establish. Right. So it follows that they are not such a person who goes for refuge without fully establishing the valid cognition, the object of refuge.
Yes.
So it follows that such a refuge is not a proper refuge.
What's the reason?
Because it is not actually established through valid ascertainment and cognition, the three jewels of refuge.
Reason not established.
Reason not established? You've contradicted the text and you've contradicted the scripture.
Oh.
And it is such because it is the most holy thought
No,
of the
I'm
heart
saying
son
that
of
the
Lama
Buddha
Tsongkhapa,
is established as a valid refuge. Yeah.
from the text that he himself composed, the ocean of reasoning in regard to valid cognition.
Three spheres.
He says, and I quote, when you go for refuge through having established through valid cognition and found a stable ascertainment, then it has the power to turn back the mountain of cyclic existence. But when you do not have a proper reason and you don't establish with valid cognition the three jewels of refuge, then it does not fulfill the definition of going for refuge. So it has been said.
I don't accept. Hear me. When he says it does not fill the meaning of refuge, does not fill the definition of refuge, he means it doesn't perfectly fulfill the definition.
Does not
of
perfectly
refuge.
fulfill, but it still can
the
fulfill.
definition of refuge.
So therefore, this person, although he does not establish the valid cognition, the three jewels of refuge, he still goes to refuge through the three jewels of refuge.
If someone hasn't, if to go for refuge with three jewels, someone has to establish that they can refute samsara with valid cognition, then you and I wouldn't have refuge.
We wouldn't have refuge.
At least
So Paul is that you and I have not actually
you.
established that the three jewels of refuge can turn back samsara.
Not with valid cognition. Yeah.
Not with valid cognition.
Yeah, I accept.
So it follows that without valid cognition to establish that the three jewels can turn back samsara, we still have gone for refuge. So it follows that we are not properly following the Buddha's teachings.
What's the reason?
Because the Buddha himself, as I said at the beginning, he said that just as the person would test gold by cutting, burning, and rubbing it, similarly a person should not accept the teachings without establishing them through the three types of analysis.
It means you should check, not that you have to. Just because you don't know if a food has poison or not doesn't mean. I mean.
Okay, so you check for 1 day.
To test.
1 day. Is 1 day enough?
Is 1 day?
2 days? Or 1 week?
1 day of what enough?
Checking. Analyzing.
I didn't posit any kind of time frame.
There's no time frame.
No.
Well, when do you decide? When do you know when you're ready to go for refuge for the three jewels?
When you feel like you have full faith that the three jewels can guide you to the aim that you
Oh,
want
when
to
you
accomplish.
feel that you have full faith that the three jewels can guide you, then it's proper to go for refuge.
Having analyzed, then you establish that.
But how much do you have to analyze?
Just because Manjushri is not. It follows that there are not two methods to generate bodhicitta.
The reason is unestablished.
It follows that there are two methods to generate bodhicitta.
I accept.
What are the two methods?
These two methods are the 7-point cause and effect instruction taught by Atisha, and the 5 steps of exchanging self and others, which come from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva.
By Shantideva, right. It follows that these are both complete methods to generate bodhicitta.
I accept.
So it follows that by practicing the sevenfold cause and effect method taught by Atisha, one can, by following that method alone, one can generate bodhicitta.
In conjunction with things like refuge and renunciation, yes. When
Okay.
you say alone,
So what did I say? It follows that by practicing the sevenfold cause and effect method generate bodhicitta, independently practicing the method for exchanging self, exchanging self on others, then one can generate bodhicitta.
yes, I accept.
Okay. So it follows that in order to achieve enlightenment, one does not have to practice exchanging self and others. Speak.
I will give a slight nuanced answer to that. So one does have to practice exchanging self and others, but not in the method taught by Shantideva.
Okay.
Not in the 5-step method.
So it follows that if one practices exchanging self and others to generate or enhance one's bodhicitta, one does not necessarily practicing the fivefold method of exchanging self and others.
Yes, I accept.
So it follows that to achieve enlightenment, one has to practice exchanging self and others.
I accept.
It follows that to achieve enlightenment, one as well has to meditate on the faults of self-cherishing.
I accept.
One has to meditate on the faults of cherishing others.
The faults of cherishing
On
others.
the benefits of cherishing others. Sorry.
Yeah.
One has to meditate as well on the benefits of cherishing others.
Yes, I accept that.
And then one has to practice exchanging self and others. Tonglen,
Yes.
giving and taking. In order to achieve, it follows that a person can achieve enlightenment without practicing giving and taking.
I accept.
You accept?
Yes.
All right. So it follows that the practice of, let's say, so it follows that, what's the final practice? Giving and taking?
Giving and taking is the final step.
Oh yeah, giving and taking. So it follows that if one practices the fivefold, the method of exchanging self and others to generate bodhicitta, one doesn't actually have to achieve bodhicitta.
One practices the fivefold method of bodhicitta, one does not have to achieve bodhicitta.
So it follows that by without practicing without practicing exchanging self, without practicing giving and taking,
Oh yes.
one can achieve full enlightenment.
I accept.
So it follows that without giving, one can achieve full enlightenment.
Without giving.
Within giving and taking,
yes, yes.
within giving and taking,
Yes.
without meditating on giving, one can achieve full enlightenment.
I accept.
So it follows that without meditating on offering one's merits and one's happiness to other sentient beings, one can achieve enlightenment.
What is the reason?
Because without meditating on the method of giving and taking, one can achieve enlightenment.
The reason is not established.
Contradiction.
Sorry, there's no
So it
provision.
follows
There's
that
no
in order to
provision.
achieve enlightenment,
There's no provision. Sorry,
it follows
there's no
that in order to achieve enlightenment, one must meditate on giving and taking.
According to the no.
It follows that in order
What
to
is the
achieve
reason? What is the
enlightenment,
reason?
one must meditate on giving and taking.
What is your reason?
Ah,
What is your reason?
because you accepted.
Yes, I made a mistake there.
Okay, so it follows that in order to achieve enlightenment, one does not have to meditate on giving and taking.
That's correct.
So it follows that in order to achieve enlightenment, one does not have to meditate on the method of giving within the method of giving and taking.
I accept.
So it follows that in order to achieve enlightenment, well, first of all, what do you posit as the method of giving within the practice of giving and taking?
Within that method, then it involves the method of mounting the giving and taking upon the breath.
Mounting, giving, and taking upon the breath is the method of giving within the practice of giving and taking.
Within that fivefold practice, yes, I accept.
So it follows that. If something is the method of giving within the practice of giving and taking, it is necessarily mounting giving upon the breath.
I accept.
So it follows that it's possible to mount giving upon the breath.
To visualize mounting giving upon the breath, yes.
So it follows that visualizing mounting giving upon the breath is not mounting giving upon the breath.
What is your reason?
Because you said that to mount giving upon the breath actually means to visualize mounting giving upon the breath.
Exactly.
So it follows that if you visualize mounting giving upon the breath, you don't necessarily mount giving upon the breath.
You do.
So it is mounting giving upon the breath.
Yes. I
So it follows that to practice giving and taking within the method of giving and taking, you have to necessarily mount giving upon the breath.
Yes, that's correct.
It follows that. But it follows that without mounting giving and taking upon the breath, in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to offer your merits and happiness to others.
I accept.
So it follows that you have to wish that the suffering of all sentient beings ripen upon yourself.
What is your reason?
So it follows that in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to practice offering your merit and happiness to other sentient beings.
Yes.
But you don't need to wish that the suffering of other sentient beings ripen upon oneself.
I accept.
Okay. So it follows that. It's not possible for the suffering of the other sentient beings to ripen upon yourself.
What is your reason?
So it follows that it's possible for the suffering of other sentient beings to ripen upon yourself.
Yes, I accept.
So it follows that the practice of wishing that the suffering of other sentient beings ripen upon yourself is a conducive method to generating enlightenment.
I accept.
To achieving enlightenment.
I accept.
So it follows that. In order to achieve enlightenment, the bodhisattva doesn't have to practice all of the conducive methods for achieving enlightenment.
I accept.
So it follows that there's an enlightened being who has not perfected the practice of giving and taking.
I accept.
So it follows that there's a difference in qualities between enlightened beings.
What is your reason?
Because there's some beings who have perfected the practice of giving and taking, and there are other enlightened beings who have not perfected the practice of giving and taking.
There's no provision.
So it follows that if one ordinary sentient being has the quality of realizing emptiness and another sentient being doesn't, then there's no difference in qualities between them.
What is your reason?
Because so it follows that there is a difference in qualities between them.
Yes, I accept.
So it follows that if one person has one ordinary person,
Okay.
one person has perfected the practice of giving and taking, and another has not, then there's a difference in qualities between them.
Yes, I accept.
So it follows that the contradiction. So it follows that if there's one enlightened being who has perfected the practice of giving and taking, and there's another who hasn't, then there's a difference in qualities between them.
What is your reason?
Because it's the case with ordinary beings, and they're concomitant.
It's not similar.
They're similar.
It's not similar.
So how are they not similar?
When somebody achieves enlightenment, then they achieve equal realization to everybody else. However, when we say that they perfected the practice of giving and taking, it's speaking about what practices they did.